Okay, so the time is 1 minute after 5 on Friday, on Monday, February the 6th, 2023, and this is the Redevelopment Commission meeting. Could we have a roll call by name, please?
Deborah Meyerson here.
Sarah Bowerly-Danston here.
Randy Cassidy here.
Deborah Hutton, yes. Staff who are here?
John Zodi with the Hand Department.
Christina Finley, Hand Department.
Larry Allen Legal.
Alex Crowley with Economic and Sustainable Development.
Barry Collins with Hand.
Very gutsy, citizen of
I think we might have a number of staff online too, some of our CDBG staff as well.
Cody Toothman here from Hand.
Patrick Durkis here with engineering.
Matt Swinney with Hand.
Anyone else?
That's it.
Okay, sounds great. And sorry for the gravelly voice, it's the COVID voice. Could we have, in terms of minutes, the minutes for January 23rd, 2023, and the executive summary for January 23, 2023. Are there any, from the members of the commission, are there any changes to make? And if so, speak them. If not, please send someone, make a motion to approve.
Sarah Bowerly-Danston, I motion to approve the minutes from January 23, 2023, as well as the executive summary for January 23, 2023.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. All in favor, roll call by, vote by roll call, please.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly-Danston, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
And Deborah Hutton, yes. Passes unanimously. Next item, examination of claims for February 3rd, 2023 for the amount of $2,506,100.07. Could I have any questions from the commissioners or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion. No comments or questions, commissioners? If so, could I have a motion?
Randy Cassidy, I'll make a motion to approve.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll
Okay.
second.
Deborah Meyerson, second. All in favor, please vote by roll call.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly-Danston, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Deborah Hutton, yes. Next item is the payroll register for January 27, 2023 for $37,000, $391.93. Could I have any comments or questions for commissioners? If not, and I'll entertain a motion.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll make a motion to approve the examination of payroll registers from January 27th, 2023.
And Sarah Bowerly-Danston, I'll second.
Thank you. I have a first and second. All in favor, please vote by roll call.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly-Danston, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Deborah Hutton, yes. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Reports from officers and committees. Is there a director's report?
There is briefly. We have a very hand-heavy agenda tonight, so my only report is that we will have another public hearing for the home ARP plan on the 20th at our next meeting as well. That was noticed in the paper, and so we're going to do one tonight and then one more on the 20th, and that's my only report to you this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A legal report?
Just very briefly, I just wanted to report that the purchase of the CFC Showers building located at 320 West 8th Street was approved by City Council, and we closed on that purchase last Tuesday, and we have officially taken over that building. I also owe the commissioners an email with conflict of interest forms, and I apologize for not getting that out. I'll get that out as soon as I possibly can, so that you can all return those to our conflict of interest officer. Thank you.
I have a question.
Of course. Yeah.
So I thought that we were going to be reached out to regarding getting our new bond, but I haven't heard anything. So am I supposed to be doing something that I didn't do?
At the last meeting, yeah, you actually signed your oath and the
Okay,
application
great.
for your new
Okay.
bond, and so
Thank
we
you
have
for
obtained
reminding
that.
me.
Yep. And we have one more, so Commissioner Cassidy, I have his here today, so he can sign that, and that we can just present this. But thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you for no
Should've called
PBing
that.
on that.
So, one question in regards to report, we, the city as a whole, we now have the CFC portion of showers.
It's owned in the name of the Redevelopment Commission, so
Named
that
in-
was
okay.
approved
So-
by you and then approved by City Council. 'cause
City
it was-
council, so then that moves forward, so there's, anything else will come back at a future date in regards to, or is this just moving forward on the bond issue outside of redevelopment?
So in addition to that, so the city of Bloomington itself issued the bonds. They were economic development, local income tax bonds, revenue bonds. And a portion of those income tax was dedicated toward public safety, construction of facilities, so fire and police facilities. And so the intent there is to use those bonds as those bonds that were already issued. The ED lit will be the backup for those bonds, so will be essentially what is used to service those City of Bloomington bonds. So that would be paid out of that. Anything that comes out of the Redevelopment Commission will have to be approved by the Redevelopment Commission, but those bonds technically sit in a separate account. So that'll be a discussion that we'll have as we go. We're just at the very beginning of this process, kind of figuring it out. So we'll probably come back to you kind of with an update. I'm guessing within the next couple of months, just in terms of getting together. The next step would be to put out an RFQ, for instance, for a design firm and kind of get that together. But yeah, it'll be a conversation that we'll kind of all have together, and then any expenses, special expenses, will come to you both in the form of they'll be on your claims register for any kind of electricity, normal utility stuff. But if there's any special claims, those will obviously come to you separately.
Okay, but we've already financed the basis and taken care of the purchase price.
Yep, that's correct. And the purchase price in this case came out of those bonds, since
Out of
it's
the
going to be
bonds,
used
'cause
for that purpose.
That already been, the bonds had already been let, dollars were already accompanied.
That's correct. So the bonds have been let and specifically approved by the council, but at the same time that they approved the RDC's purchase agreement, they also approved the allocation of those funds for those purposes.
Okay.
Can you just
Thank you.
remind me, why is the RDC involved in that purchase if the bonds that are not part of the RDC are being used for the purchase?
It wasn't initially, we weren't initially sure which part, so we could have used either the TIF or those bonds, but since those bond funds were available to us to use at that time, we used those bonds. But otherwise, it would have been purchased with TIF funds, so that's why the RDC was involved.
Okay, but that wouldn't have changed once it was identified that those bonds would be available? I mean, wouldn't that have made sense? I'm not really clear on why that would
That'd be a great-
stay with the RDC if it wasn't TIF money.
Yeah, that's a good question for Controller Underwood. So we basically went with his, but the real reason why it stayed with the RDC is because the RDC is the one that solicited both the appraisals, but also made the offer of purchase and had the purchase agreement there. So in order to shift the ownership structure or the purchase structure, we would have had to do that a completely different way. So that wouldn't have been an agreement you could have just used to purchase that without the RDC's approval.
Sure. When was it clarified that other bonds, not TIF money, was being used for the purchase in terms of what the kind of timeline like that was?
A week and a half ago,
Okay.
at the city council meeting when they approved it. To be honest with you, so it was proposed that those bonds, if we were going to use it for a police headquarters and possible fire administration, that those bonds could be the source of that. City council had to make that ultimate determination whether that's a way that they wanted to use those ED funds or not. There was obviously an outstanding question, a very lengthy debate about whether they wanted those bonds only to go for other projects that were outside of that showers purchase, or they wanted to go for that as well, and so they chose to lump those together. And so because the bonds were already sold and the money was available, we didn't have to use TIF funds, and so we went ahead and used those funds that were available.
Okay. And then one last question was, I know that council discussed this, but I don't remember kind of what the conclusion was, which is, since the square footage for the CFC portion of the showers building is, I think, roughly double what is needed for police and fire, in any case, there's an excessive amount of square footage that's beyond what is needed for this exact transaction. Are those bonds also being used for that purchase?
So the bonds were used for the purchase. There's no determination about the usage of that remaining square footage at this time, so we don't know how it'll be used. remember, we haven't actually, so while there were preliminary designs sought, to make sure that it was a feasible use
Right.
of it, we don't have an actual design of what this looks like yet. So that's the part that we're at the beginning of. So we actually don't know for sure what's going to be remaining. I know that there was a lengthy discussion, like taking into account like all of the common areas were being lumped into the remaining square footage. And so it kind of looked like it was 50-50, but I don't think that that was actually the case. I think it was more like a 18% potential square footage of just that initial design would be usable space outside of what was planned for the police. But again, that's not a final design, so we just don't know yet. And that's certainly a conversation that we'll have to have in terms of how that space will be used, and then whether it'll serve, potentially other fire needs or other police needs or anything like that.
Is there a potential that that financing might retake new shape if the uses of the, let's say, the non-police or fire space is used for something else? Because my understanding that this was a public safety focus for the bonds, and if they're not being used for that purpose. I'm just trying to get a sense of like the way that the financing has already shifted, if there's a potential for it to shift again.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't know if that's a discussion that they finalized in terms of between the administration and city council about how those funds will be used. So they've already been used for the purchase price. There are some questions, there's some questions just in terms of that discussion also about, for instance, rent revenues, because obviously there's still tenants. The way, as you know, the way that's typically operated with all of our other properties is that money really goes back into the property. So it uses to support all the utilities and things like that. So there might be a balance or a trade-off there, whereas, theoretically, if you could keep some of that rent revenue, it'll go back into that project and stay with the project in lieu of trying to shift around funds to pay for any other part of it. So that would be the part of the ongoing discussion, I think.
Will the RFQs come back?
Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to thank Larry for something my questions.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you for your help on my questions.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The RFQ, will that come through redevelopment, or does that just go through the administration and then they take it from there?
I think the RFQ for the design portion of it has been just released by the administration at this point, just to see what comes out. I'm not actually sure, Commissioner Cassidy. I'll check on that and get back to you with a firmer answer. I'm not entirely sure.
Just curious where it runs into the process in regards to where our responsibilities.
Again, and this we've done this on other projects as well. If the RDC is the owner of the property, the way we would structure those contracts typically is that you would also be a signatory to those, which means that those contracts would come back through here for approval. So that might be one avenue, but I'll double check on that. That's kind of my preliminary answer, but I'm not.
Sounds good. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I apologize for being late to the meeting. Thank you, Deb, for stepping in. I really appreciate that. I think the next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. Do we have one this evening?
I believe Mr. Underwood is in Florida right now, maybe not attending the meeting, as is his prerogative. So I'm happy to answer any questions or try to pass along any questions in reality to Controller Underwood that I can.
All right, thank you.
Besides the ones that have already been posed.
Business development updates.
It's a full agenda. I'm going to pass on updates tonight.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to new business. First item is the Hopewell presentation.
Thank you, Madam President. So we've got a group tonight presenting. Deb Kuntz, our project consultant, is on with us with J.S. Held, I think. Pardon me. Deb, are you leading us off?
I'm happy to, unless MC's in the room or
I
the
didn't
mayor.
see Mary Catherine or the mayor on, so I think maybe you. So tonight, as Deb will say, we're just going to give you an update on the latest at the Hopewell project. Ms. Kuntz, myself, and Mr. Crowley will be chiming in, I believe. Maybe
Would you like me to share the screen?
Mr. Durkis, that'd be great. Mr. Durkis from engineering as well, perhaps. So, okay. Turn it over to you, Deb.
Okay, excellent. Let's go over here to the beginning. All right, so we thought it'd be good. I know every once in a while we give you just an update on progress on Hopewell, and so we're going to do that again today. We're going to start always with really trying to continue to clarify the vision for the neighborhood. We'll touch on an overall schedule update, give you some specifics about progress, and of course there's always challenges. We want to be upfront about those as well, and then talk about what's coming next for the RDC and what you'll see in the coming months. So very quickly, there's a lot of words on the screen here. Oh, excuse me. And I think it's best that if we think about what is, sorry, I'm just trying to make this viewable. When we think about the Hopewell neighborhood vision, I think there's really 3 words that come to mind, and that is affordability, sustainability, and design. And so the words that are on, and I'm going to go ahead and read the words just to make sure that we hear them out loud, but those affordability, sustainability, and design are really kind of the 3 pillars that this program is really built on in building this neighborhood. So, you know, the first is Bloomington must continue to diversify and expand opportunities for all. That's the diversity and affordability. Hopewell should be an inclusive neighborhood where people from all walks of life and all ages, incomes, abilities, and backgrounds can thrive. So that is the affordability part, making sure it's available for everyone. Second, sustainability. Bloomington must create sustainable neighborhoods to advance toward a zero carbon future. Hopewell should exhibit best practices in sustainable redevelopment as a blueprint for a more equitable, livable, and resilient Bloomington. And last but not least, Bloomington must continue to be a place of beauty and excellent design for all. Hopewell should be an inspiring neighborhood of excellent design in public and private amenities. And so again, this focus on affordability, sustainability, and design really become, as we continue to move forward with not only infrastructure, but as we begin to ask the development community to propose on development opportunities here, these are the 3 pillars that we'll continue to talk with them about. Now, many of you know, I probably have seen this slide before, but I think it's also good to just remind ourselves that this has been going on a while, since May of 2018. And then fortunately, as we have continued to work through the master plan and the naming of Hopewell, we also received some of that ownership of land transfer that happened last summer, plus the Phase 1 East demolition. And it began in last July, and if you've been by there recently, you know that the Phase 1 East demolition is complete, thanks to the good team from our engineering department. And you'll see that over 75% of the existing legacy hospital has actually come down. And so it really is a focus now on continued infrastructure, but as important, or maybe more importantly, is opportunities for development, where we really want to invite developers in to talk about and to propose on opportunities for primarily housing in this neighborhood. Like you were seeing me starting to focus on a couple things here. Let me just do something real quick here. Let me take these off. These were my notes. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay. So when we think about what is the key updates and things that are going on. So again, a lot of words here. There's been a lot of progress. We have a couple challenges we'll touch on as well. Is one, the steering committee for Hopewell has continued. We may have some people change in and out, but really focused on continuing to have those, and we're focused in on biannual meetings with them. The outreach to neighbors happens through the individual meetings. MC has been going to some of those. I know John attends some of those as well. And as we continue to get into infrastructure project construction, as well as what's happening with development, there'll be increased connection. In fact, we just heard even, I think it was last week, about the door hangers that were put before the demolition started on Phase 1 East, and how appreciative a neighbor was about getting the door hanger, because at least they knew something was coming before demolition started on Phase 1 East. Of course, rezoning has been complete now for a while at Hopewell. There's even been some parcelings with the city council and on blocks 1, 2, and 3. If you didn't follow the council's approval of the overlay district that was adopted back in December, that's critical. So that identifies some changes for some of those zoning requirements in this particular area. I mentioned IU Health demolition already, and then there's some work that's happening on the infrastructure. An RFI is on the street for design services for part of Jackson Street. The First Street reconstruction is out to bid, and the Second Street modernization and design. So some things that are happening on the infrastructure side. I must have really thought it was important to mention the overlay district, because I listed it twice here. But I think it's also important, as I mentioned, that we're really gonna start moving into the phase now of not only continuing to focus on some infrastructure and leveraging dollars, but also moving forward with some development. And I think with this group, we've heard that there's some developer being identified through a previous RFI process for the core building. And so we are continuing to work with them. Phase 1 demolition is complete. We've started to promote it with signage. If you haven't been by it yet, would encourage you to do that. The first development RFI is to be released soon, and we're going to release that for looking at the blocks 8, 9, and 10, and then follow that quickly with blocks 1, 2, 3. And for those of you who may be wondering, well, what are those blocks? I'm going to show you that in a graphic here in just a second. So sit tight, and we'll show that. And then the last two are the city's continuous focus on how can we get other funds, how do we leverage other funds through federal funds or other grants to help support the infrastructure and design that is needed to continue forward, again, for the infrastructure on the project. Those are some of the highlights. That's a lot. That's been happening in 2020. A lot of that actually happened in 2022. But obviously challenges continue, and we're not shy about those. Construction costs are high. I think that if you're following what happened with the Board of Public Works, you may know that the Phase 1 East infrastructure project bid over budget. Because of construction costs are high, we are going to be actively looking at a rebidding for that, trying to make some scope adjustments, but still keep the great flair and flavor of Phase 1 East in terms of that infrastructure. And again, that's the roads and things that, utilities and things that are underneath. Another challenge that's going to be coming up is council approval of the alley right-of-ways. I think there was quite a discussion when blocks 1, 2, and 3 went through, and that will continue to be a challenge as we continue forward. So I mentioned that I was going to show you a picture again of the blocks, and so this is a snapshot of the master plan. And when we look at the master plan document, it really identified kind of 10 blocks. And so the B line is here to the right. You can see the B line in green. And then we have 2nd Street to our top, which is in blue here, and we have 1st Street coming through in blue there. Plus we have the new proposed streets for Phase 1 East with the additional parks area off of it. So you'll see that over here in the left-hand side, that all of the things that are in that kind of royal blue, those are the funded projects, and that is the commitment that mostly the commitment that the RDC has made in terms of leveraging those dollars to really kickstart the infrastructure, but also utilizing some of that federal funds both on 2nd Street and on 1st Street for these long streets that are going here. We know that though while there's a lot of royal blue on the screen, there is more infrastructure to be funded, and we're continuing to leverage ways that we can look at grant funding. And as I show here, this light blue, we're looking at hopefully some grant funding in there. But we also have some unfunded parks areas, and I consider that kind of that urban park area. But it's also important to remind ourselves that we now have about 50% of the IU Health property that's been turned over to the city, or you purchased, I should say. So that is blocks 1, 2, and 3 have all been transferred over to the city, as well as 8, 9, and 10. And it's also important to remind ourselves that the existing core building, that's intended to remain with a development addition to that for housing. And then the garage, which is right here on block 4, is the parking garage to remain. So a lot happening here. That dark blue really shows the progress, and the light blue shows there's even more progress. Cross your fingers, hopefully coming. But the red knows we've got more to come. And as I mentioned, the RFIs that are going to be coming soon on development, you'll see that we've colored blocks 1, 2, and 3, and 8, 9, and 10 all in gray, not only because they have been transferred over to the city of Bloomington, but that those also are going to be some of those first RFIs that you see coming out to the development community, asking for their ideas, asking for their proposals about providing not only multifamily and mixed-use housing, particularly on 1, 2, and 3, and some on 8, but also some single-family and townhomes that were all planned as part of the master plan that's been provided by SOM. It shouldn't go unnoticed that IU Health continues to be on schedule for the demolition of the Legacy Hospital. They, in the coming months, will be transitioning to the full building above ground will be down soon, and they will be focused on everything underground because they do have some significant foundations to remove. Plus, the goal is to then make sure that they are adjusting the grades or the soils in that area to make sure that we have positive drainage and really creating that site so it's ready for us to consider for development. So again, a lot here, but I think key is blue is good, right? Things are going. We've got red, we've got some continued challenges with infrastructure. We got to continue to look for new ways to support that. Now, one of the questions that I think this group has had in the past was about the mixed-use non-residential first floor. And when we think about first floor non-residential, sometimes we automatically go to retail. And while that may or may not be the right solution for these developments, we'll really be testing the market with our developers on that. I thought it would be good to showcase some of the other uses that not only were identified in the master plan, but are also allowable as part of the UDO. And so, you know, some of that non-residential first floor, it could be workspace, it could be lobby space. Childcare is a permitted use. Adult daycare, social services, any fitness or wellness, you can, all of these that are shown here are permitted uses within the primary zoning classification for Hopewell. Not everyone, but where the multifamily is, these are the permitted spaces. So makerspace, shared kitchen, job training, cafe or coffee shop, barbershop or salon, community and event space, gallery and art studio. So while again, we'll really look to the developers to bring those ideas, and we're going to encourage them to partner and bring, you know, relationships to this area so that that non-residential first floor can be activated. But this is a great example of it. It doesn't all have to be retail. There are a lot of different uses that are allowed in the UDO. John, do you want to talk about some other development goals here?
Sure.
Affordable?
We'll always defer to Alex on the sustainability piece, but I'll sort of skip to affordability there. As Deb mentioned, affordability is one of the main three sort of tenets with Hopewell that we're looking at, and we have an overall goal of a 20% affordable goal for the entire site, and that would include housing that is traditionally considered affordable, so 80% of area median income and below. That could also encompass workforce housing, which is, the income there is up to 120%. So we are looking at that, how we can bring that into the affordability band, because under the Unified Development Ordinance, the incentives for affordable housing go up to 120% of AMI. So when we look at that overall 20% goal, we are looking at a broad range of housing, and of course we'll have market rate in as well. We want to have also a range of rental and home ownership in there. Home ownership is a little more difficult to come by when you're looking at larger, more dense multifamily type buildings. But on the 8, 9, and 10 blocks that Deb mentioned, those parcels south of First Street that we'll soon issue an RFI on, that is where most of our single family home, our paired townhomes and things like that are targeted to go. So we look for a little more home ownership opportunity there, and we're in fact saying that it is our goal that a lot of that would be home ownership in the RFI. So when we send that out to the development community, we expect to see proposals back that will see how we can advocate for home ownership and see some of that come to reality as well. So maybe hit the next slide there, Deb.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
I'd like to ask one question in regards to that. When we're talking 80 to 120% AMI and such, general public and myself included, what is that?
So
in a dollar aspect?
Yeah, area median income as determined by HUD this year is $91,400 for a family of 4. So when you get above that number, you can mathematically calculate what that number would be. So 120% of $91,400 is, I'm going to not do good math in my head here, so somewhere around $110,000 maybe, if I remember
That's a family of 4, so if we're talking a young couple that's just starting, coming out here, so we're looking at that of $40,700.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is it a division aspect
No.
of 91.4, or
No,
how would we calculate that? Because typically in these starting areas of that nature, even the multifamily, where we're not going to have a family of 4 occupying in that particular area to start.
Right. And that's where we have some flexibility as the city. Once you get above 80%, it is less prescribed. And so we were doing mathematical calculations there for a family of 4, and we would look at maybe 110%. We're not going to maybe restrict the household number.
Okay.
We're going to look at sort of the income earners themselves and what that would be. Once you get 80% and below, HUD has a prescribed chart that says this is the AMI, the area median income. This is what 80% is, this is what 60% is. And those numbers are not direct mathematical calculations that you would think. So if you try to calculate all that out based on 91,400, you're not going to get the numbers that are on the HUD chart because they have other methodology that goes into that AMI number. So you can't do the math. I tried to do it on a spreadsheet once, and I was told quite quickly that you can't do that. So they establish that number based on methodology, inflation, all that other stuff, and then they do that chart, that income chart. So when we are looking at affordable housing and who qualifies, we have to literally look at that chart and say, for this year, for 2023, it's this. And so that's how it works.
Okay, so that, and the question I guess would be for yourself and Deb, as we look at trying to put single-family homes and such in here, which is a phenomenal idea, great walkability and the rest, how do we try to work this in from a numeric standpoint and from a developer standpoint where we can hit that average of 30% of what people's income is into their housing aspect, given the construction costs?
Sure.
Is there a methodology that we can help
Financing
follow,
costs.
a financing to help actually get the people in so they've got the home
Right.
and can stay in and afford to keep it in the condition that we'd like to see in our community?
Sure. I would say that when we issue the RFIs, request for information, which is that request for proposals to come back to us, for this bit of the project, the 8, 9, and 10 blocks, we are estimating, and all of this is, I don't want to say, it is estimates basically. Right. We are offering guidance in there that says we would like to see homes sell in this area on these blocks for around $250,000. That is the sort of the price point if you're going to sell, and lower, right? Because once you get to 250 or so, that's still a pretty solid number for somebody in the workforce housing range. It's still pretty high. The median sales price right now in Bloomington is around $300,000, so it's still pretty high. So we're sort of setting that price point, because that's what we also did up at Arlington Park Drive, and saying, okay, $250,000 is sort of a range that we want to see and below for these to sell. We're also saying that in that request, the blocks are very different. So block 10 is about 11 lots, and you can do up to 4plexes there. And then you get to block 9, it's bigger. And then block 10, we may be reusing a building there. And so we're saying, come back to us with a combination of, if you want to just do block 10, that's fine, but you can also say, I want to do block 10 and block 9, and try to come up with a combination that would give the developer maybe some volume they need to make the numbers work better.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So that's what I would say today on that question. And then once they come in, once they're built, if they're home ownership, which we hope they would be, there may be a land trust opportunity in here too. Then the property would be managed either by the homeowner or by our department as a rental property. It would actually be enforced, I should say, through the code enforcement side. So, does that answer your question?
It's a good start.
All right,
I have
thanks.
some questions too,
Yeah.
please.
Sure.
One, is there any potential for the city to have a more targeted commitment for different income levels than 80% and below, which may just wind up all at 80%, or could, in terms of, because that's if a development, anyway, and then same for 80 to 120. Mostly I'm thinking 80 and below, again, targeted more specifically than just 80 and below.
Yeah.
And then my other question is, what kind of incentives is the city considering to help make that more feasible from a financing perspective
Sure.
for a developer coming up with a proposal?
I may answer your second question first, because I was going to answer it with the second question. So we're sort of keeping all the incentives on the table with the single family and the paired townhomes. We have to look at, I think, and Deb chime in, but there are currently buildings there. Our intention would be that the development community would pay for that demolition. There's infrastructure. There's all that stuff with the land that we still own. That's number one. Number two, if these are going to be owner occupied, sort of jumping ahead one step, if they're owner occupied, we have down payment assistance programs that could help people get into some of those houses priced at a higher price point. For the developers, we're going to have to offer some type of incentive like the Housing Development Fund that could help with workforce housing. HUD incentives, HUD programs can't, as you know, help with anything above 80%, so we have housing development funds we might be able to offer. As we get further up the site, when you do the multifamily, the core building, if everything goes as it is intended to be, is a 9% low-income housing tax credit project. And then looking at where we could do a 4% project somewhere else on the site. So you're looking at tax credits as well as all the other incentives like tax abatements and all of that stuff. There's really not an incentive that's off the table, but we have to be very mindful of our own financing and what we can afford to do as we progress.
Or any other options like a long-term ground lease or discounted land acquisition part of that, or, you know, even expedited permitting, right? Just to kind of shorten the timeline of the project. Just trying to get a sense of, because obviously funds are limited, housing development fund, LIHTC's competitive, except 4%, then you gotta build a lot bigger project. So you're just trying to get a sense of what incentives that the city can have control over to offer.
I don't know, and I won't speak, careful to speak on this. I haven't heard much discussion about a discounted land price. We have talked about long-term leases. The UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance incentives could come in with some expedited permitting and the incentives that we offer there, for getting additional height or footprint for affordable housing. So,
So getting back to my first question now, what kind of commitment is there for targeting more specific income levels?
And that's, pardon me, I didn't fully answer the question. I think that's going to depend on the incentives we can offer. So when we get proposals back on that first RFI for 8, 9, and 10, we'll see what we get back and what they might be asking us for. And then we will, I think it's going to be some negotiation saying, well, we would like to see this income threshold be lower, so we might be able to offer this incentive or that one. If we can get into the federal incentives on some of these, then obviously gives us more ability because we have more cash to offer. But as you know, with that comes additional regulation if they're doing a multifamily or something like that. So I think that's going to come in, but for a tax credit project, which is prescribed at 60% and below, and you know, I think there's going to be some negotiation in there, with a goal overall to be at 20% at least affordable across the site. So we've got to really, there's a financial model that we're going to be working within that it's sort of if X then Y, and we've got to keep plugging in numbers and scenarios as we advance this out. So
okay, so it's not feasible to make a commitment at this stage in the project that it's gonna get, let's say, much below 80, even though obviously there's interest in that possibility.
I think there is interest, and I don't think I'm comfortable saying that we won't get much further below that, because if we have a tax credit project there, if the core building goes, that's 60% and below. They'll have 10 units of supportive housing in there, which is, you know, for permanent supportive housing for people who would be at risk of homelessness. So I'm not comfortable saying that we wouldn't be driving that down yet. I just can't tell you in stone.
What kind of commitment, how firm a commitment can be made sooner in the process than just waiting to see what comes back, even though I realize there's lots of different variables to consider, and, you know, getting it funded is a primary consideration. I certainly understand that.
Yeah, I don't think I could say any more right now, just because I wouldn't feel responsible. I feel like I'd be getting out ahead of my skis, but as that being one of the three, and it's something that's sort of my involvement in the whole thing, is how do we get housing, how do we maximize affordability there? And so that's what we're going to keep doing, just keep at it.
Okay.
Yep.
One question in regards for Deb Koontz in regards to following the overlay process in the Plan Commission. Pretty well identified on Lot 1, 2, what they want built, what we want built as a whole. How do you see that from your overall budget standpoint, being able to be a feasible aspect based on the conditions of the overlay, as far as being able to build it based on what we're seeing construction costs in a time frame, in a realistic time frame where we're putting it out in the next year or so?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, construction costs are high. There's a lot of housing development going around our state. A lot of communities have the housing need. So I think, you know, we've been obviously doing a lot of outreach, trying to get developers excited about Bloomington. I think just the overall package here of having the opportunity to be part of here, you know, this 20-ish acre, you know, development. I think the other thing that's going to be a driver here is the access along the B line. It's just location, location, location. So, you know, trying to make that connection. Performas are going to be tough to make, so the incentive discussion is an important one. I think, you know, just to reinforce what John just said, is the key is we're not taking anything off the table, and we are going to get many requests for those incentives. I can definitely appreciate the opportunity to maybe just say, commit to something up in advance. We'll see, maybe that changes, but for right now, I think we thought it would be better to just go ahead and leave everything on the table. I think with the other piece that I just want to come back to the overlay specifically, I think there were some things that really make the overlay enticing for development. A couple of things, like one, there is no minimum parking. You know, this is an urban area. We have the existing parking garage that they can lease. That may change the performer for them. So I think we're helping them in that way, helping developers in that way. Another way that we're helping developers is that the underground drainage system for those parcels is happening through the rain gardens that are part of Phase 1 East infrastructure, right? So they don't have to do underground storage tanks for that water. And engineering is on the line. Patrick is on the line. He can talk in more detail about that. But that helps on their infrastructure side of it. So again, kind of taking, and we've been talking to a lot of developers about those things. They're super excited about it. There's also, as part of coming back to the overlay district, the reduction of the side setbacks. So they have more area to build on. There's specific incentives about, they get more height with affordability. So, you know, the overlay is helping, those are 4 or 5 different ways I think that we're trying to help attract development to this area, particularly as we look at blocks 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. Sarah?
Oh, what? If you have a follow-up, I had a different question.
Yeah, okay, good. The only other follow-up I have is we've identified 6 blocks that we're looking to do on our first thing. Are we breaking these off where a smaller developer in our region could actually do this, as opposed to going to a larger developer that comes in and, you know, as it is, I have to put my Bloomington hat on in regards to smaller and better and quality communities,
Yeah.
so.
That's a good, that's a good question. With 8, 9, and 10, in the RFI, we say, if you want to do 10, great. If you want to do 8 and 9, great. If you want to do 9 and 10, great. The only prohibition there is we're not saying you can do half, you're not going to be able to do half of 9 and 10, right? We want it to be sort of segmented like that. We haven't quite decided yet whether we're going to issue an RFI for all of 1, 2, and 3 or do them separately. So that's where that is. But let me also say we have been doing local outreach. So I've been in touch with the local building and development community and in the chamber and everybody else to make sure that local folks are plugged in when we send stuff out.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the other advantages that 1, 2, and 3 have is that they've been parceled and the alleys are clear. And so, you know, it's easier to break that down. And if it's helpful, I can pull up a map and show you what those parcels are and kind of give you a couple of ideas about how, you know, somebody could go in and develop just a parcel within 1, 2, 3. But 8, 9, and 10 are not parceled yet. So those are a little, that's why John referenced, you know, you can either do all of 8, all of 9, or all of 10, or any combination of the 3. I think when we get into 1, 2, and 3, we'll have that opportunity. If you wanted to go more down to the parcel level, there'll be smaller opportunities there too.
Thank you.
So my question has to do with kind of, especially for the multi-use and the kind of multi-unit housing. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how the city is thinking through this plan about how to try to incentivize that the people that end up living here are kind of workforce community members, as opposed to, or I'm trying to think of the way that I want to word this. I guess the concern that I have is that a lot of development in Bloomington, in particular in walkable areas downtown, ends up going to students. So how is that, like, to what extent can there be guardrails, and to what extent are there those kind of considerations in thinking about how this is managed, particularly given that Hopewell is being kind of advertised as a place for people who, you know, are part of the community year round, as opposed to student housing, and that is always an issue whenever we're doing housing development in Bloomington, but I haven't heard that directly addressed yet.
Sure. No, okay. Deb, did you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're doing things like saying it is not student housing, but I think I'm afraid we're gonna make it too cool, and it's gonna be, everyone's gonna want to be here. That's sort of the good and the bad of it. So we're talking a lot to developers about restrictions on student housing. While we didn't necessarily say that in this RFI for 8, 9, and 10, maybe we should. I know that there's an interest in saying that on 1, 2, and 3, is that, you know, this is not intended to be student, but once those rates are set, they come into that. So there have been also some discussions about, and Larry maybe can speak to this, is the opportunity for that kind of neighborhood association. And I don't know whether the city can enforce any restrictions associated with an association, but that could be another way. So John or Larry, any thoughts there?
Do you want to say anything, Larry? You mean with a home ownership association, an HOA, or something like that?
Yeah, HOA, yeah. That's what I meant, yeah.
I'm not worried as much about the, like, students owning homes. I mean, I guess that's also an issue, but I'm especially interested in these sort of like mixed-use rental units.
So you can't,
Yeah, you
restrict.
can't. I know.
Yeah, you can't
That's
say
why
no
I'm
students
asking,
allowed.
like,
Yeah,
how is
but
like
students gravitate towards, so, 5-bedroom apartments. They gravitate towards geography. So you can kind of structurally make it less appealing to them relative to other options that might exist in town. You can't just stiff arm them and prevent them from living here. From a income perspective, if we have a role in stimulating the eligibility, or I should say the income band that is allowed to work, if we have a role in it, whether it's something in the land transaction, something in the incentive structures that we put on the table, we actually can demand certain things of the developer, and income band limitations would allow for something. It doesn't really answer the student as much as it answers the market rate versus workforce, right? So you can say you have to have an income restriction. You have to impose an income restriction on the tenant, on the renters of the property. So you can kind of triangulate a little bit. It's not a perfect science, but you can triangulate and avoid a situation where it's a frat house on one extreme, and on the other extreme it becomes a market rate when it was really intended to be something other than that. And that's how you manage into those.
still worried that it's going to become student housing.
Well, I'd just like to add in terms of that question, I certainly understand the concern. On the other hand, I think it's a heavy burden to place it all on the land use. Again, there's certain things that just can't be done anyway. And it's about the quality of life, right? If your neighbors keep their trash, off the street and, it's noise compliance with noise rules and stuff, it's not the same quality of life issue. So I just wanted to clarify, I think it's in some cases more important to look at opportunities that are not bound by zoning or even, private agreements based on, incentives, et cetera, that can be leveraged to just make it a compatible community. Because it said, we want an inclusive, diverse community that includes all ages, abilities, et cetera. And students are a major part of this community. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize, I think there's other ways to manage some of the concerns that people have about student housing without necessarily tying it really closely to the developer proposal.
So Deb, is your presentation almost wrapped, or can we move on to the next item?
Let's do what's coming next, and then we'll be done here.
Okay.
So what's coming next? Phase 1 East infrastructure rebidding, as I mentioned earlier. There are going to be some public land offerings for any time that there is an RFI process for development, like we did at the core building. There'll be a public land offering, so that'll be coming to you. The land swap with Centerstone at Phase 1 East is still going to be coming your way. These RFIs that we talked about for 8, 9, and 10, and then 1, 2, and 3, and then subsequent land offerings. There is going to be the selection of an engineer for the design of Jackson Street and University, assuming we are able to secure the grant funding. And then, so that's a contract that will come to you. Of course, the land transfer at the latest at the end of 2023 will come to you. And then the opportunity for the park along University to name that park, that's going to be an opportunity to come to you as well. And then, Alex, do you want to take the last two?
Yeah, so just really briefly, the arts feasibility study that was put out at the end of last year, one of the recommendations was that the city should look at opportunities to have shared space, incubator space for artists. The building that's on the southern end of Lot 8, which is what we call the Brutalist building, and that building was earmarked as a potential place. It's not by any means guaranteed, and so the RFI that went out asked potential responders to consider that as either a redevelopment opportunity or something else. So that's that. And then on the 501c3 potential, so that you may know that the mayor and the administration has proposed a 501c3 to help the city staff really expand its resources and its expertise, especially to deal with new development opportunities. This is a classic example of that. This is a huge project. And so the potential for the 501c3 to become involved in this is pretty high, and in particular to help us really manage through this development acquisition process.
All right. Deb, anything else?
I don't think so, unless there are other questions.
I have
All right.
one more question in regards to our bid that didn't meet the budget.
Yep.
If we put it back out, will we meet the budget, or do we need to increase the budget to take into consideration what it takes to actually move things forward?
Great question. So there was, I'm gonna give you the high level, and I'm gonna ask Patrick if there's anything else he wants to add to this. There was only one bidder, and so, well, through some conversations, you know, if we got multiple bids, they may have been around the same. So there is some scope that's being kind of re-looked at, some adjustments made with the intention that we are gonna get closer to the budget. I think it's still yet to be determined whether we're actually gonna get down to the budget. But what we're trying to do as we move forward with the rebidding is put in some additional bid alternates that will give the city choices at that time, so they can make the determination whether they can be at the budget or whether a budget adjustment is going to be necessary. So Patrick, any additional thoughts you'd add to that?
I think you covered it well, but I'm available for any questions.
All right. Any other questions for Deb? Thank you so much for the presentation, and I would ask to be sent the PowerPoint, and I'm guessing everyone else would. Okay, good. Next item of business is Resolution 23-11, approval of community development block grant recommendations by the Citizens Advisory Committee. Who'd like to speak regarding this?
I'll start, Madam President. We've got staff on board. I do also think this requires a public hearing officially, so I want to maybe ask you to indicate the start of the public hearing. We'll do that again for the home ARP, but then I'll ask you to close it out once we get done. But we have our annual CDBG allocations for the commission to consider. I want to thank Commissioners Meyerson and Hutton for their participation, as well as Council Members Sandberg and Rosenbarger for their representation as well. What we have for you tonight are allocations recommended for about $875,000. $568,750 for physical improvements, $131,250 for social services, and then $175,000 for the administration of the program, which is the annual allocation cap of 20%. As you know, and for those commissioners that are new, and I don't believe we're here yet last year, the program is capped at 15% can go towards social services, so that's why you see the discrepancy in the larger amount for physical improvements. We're not allowed to award any more than 15% of the overall allocation. Now, these are estimates, and you'll notice that there are provisions in the resolution once we get our allocation determination from HUD that the Citizen Advisory Committee members allowed for those adjustments to be made. I do want to point out one typo on the social service recommendation side. The fourth organization down, which is listed as Boys and Girls Clubs, should be Beacon, actually. So there's a typo there. So they were being recommended for awarding, just as the other social service organizations were, $21,875. So I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions, as well as staff that are on.
Any
So
questions?
you're saying that you're not recommending to fund the Boys and Girls Club and instead to fund Beacon?
Right, I think that was
Okay.
That
an
was what
erroneous
the committee
mention.
actually voted on. It's just a typo. It wasn't a confusion or a discussion. It was just a typo.
Okay, I got it, okay.
And so just backing in, it's a good point. Let me point out that the members, the recommending bodies are appointed citizens There's a committee for the physical improvements for CDBG and a committee for the social service programs. So those two committees meet, they hear the applications, and then they make the decisions based on a scoring system. And so those recommendations come to you, and then if you approve them tonight, they'll go to the city council for approval on March 1st. So that's how these come together. I should have explained that ahead of time. Sorry.
Just a clarification, what you said. As we're looking at social services, fourth one down is Boys and Girls Club, and then the 10th one, or 9th one down is Boys and Girls Club.
Right.
So that should be, the fourth one down is Beacon.
Not Boys and Girls Club, that's correct.
And the, not the, 9th one down is the Boys and Girls
That's
Club.
correct. So all the applicants are listed and what they requested, and those who are funded are indicated by the recommendation amount, so over on the right. So that fourth one down should just be Beacon.
Should be Beacon.
Yep, just a typo there. Apologies for that.
All right, any other questions on resolution 23-11? Is there any public comment or questions? Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion on resolution 23-11.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 23-11 for the approval of community development block grant recommendations from the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Dan Button, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. I need a vote via roll call, please.
Deborah
Dan
Meyerson.
Button, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes. Do have some.
Cindy Canarney, yes. And resolution passes, and that ends our public hearing on that resolution. Next item on the agenda is resolution 23-12, approval to increase funding for a home modification for accessible living project at 750 South Walker, Lot 94. Who'd like to speak in regards to this?
We have Barry Collins here, our program manager for rehabs, and he can answer. Barry, do you just want to go through each of the projects and say what's...
We'll go through this one. Basically, we
Oh,
have capped.
sorry. Hey, Barry, hang on just a second.
I'm sorry, just a process
Yeah.
question, I guess.
Point of order, is that what it is? Okay, didn't you say that we needed to have a public hearing component for the previous one? Did we actually do that? 'Cause
So we actually kind of comply with the requirements of public hearing, so it's noticed, and
Okay.
then you have to ask for public comment, you have to receive public comment for it to be a public hearing.
Okay, got
Since
it.
we asked for that and no one
Okay,
provided it,
okay,
then we
just-
closed the public hearing, so
okay,
that's all
got
that's
it,
really
okay,
required.
just-
Okay,
Yep.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. This one is for a handicap ramp. This lady has been seeking this ramp for quite a number of years. Currently, her church members come and actually help her in and out of that trailer so that she can get about. We only have $3,500 for mobile homes, and that's what this is. And typically, on a mobile home, mobile homes, as you know, are elevated off the ground, okay? And to be able to put ramps and things like that in those mobile homes, you have to take that into consideration. So if that mobile home is 3 feet off the ground, and with the code being 1 in 12, you can only come down 1 inch for every foot that you go out. That would mean you'd have to have 36 feet of ramp just for this. And that $3,500 doesn't come anywhere close to addressing that kind of a need. So, and this one came out to just about $7,000, and that's what we're asking for, so we can get this thing built for this lady and get her in and out of the place.
Any questions regarding resolution 23-12?
This will take care of it where she'll be able to live there for multiple years to come.
Yes, absolutely.
In a quality of life
And,
by being able to access.
Also, we did consult the owner of the trailer park, and he's in full compliance and thinks it's a great idea for what we're going to do.
Okay. She'll be able to continue to.
Yes,
That's the main objective.
I have a question.
Please.
Just a question in terms of the permanence of the ramp. Is it built to stay for, well, through future owners, or is it a secure but temporary structure that will be taken off for the next owner?
No, it's by no ways temporary. this is put in, and it is a permanent structure because it's built absolutely particularly for that trailer in that location.
Thank you.
And she is the owner of the mobile home.
She is the owner.
Okay, so we're doing the owner modification. Okay.
All right, any other questions on resolution 23-12?
Just a really quick question. How does fair housing compliance work in the situation of a mobile home where the property owner owns the mobile home, but the park owner owns the land in terms of just, you said, of course, that the owner is happy to accommodate, and that's
Yes.
great, but I just was wondering about the obligation to accommodate, if that applies under fair housing.
I'm not aware of that. I can't answer that
Okay.
for you 100% correctly, so I'm not even gonna try.
I'm happy to take that to our accessibility people and get back to you with that answer.
Yeah, just be curious, because if Hand's funding it, and again, in this case, it works out great, because the property, or, the landowner is in compliance, but if there were any kind of discussion, just would be interested to know how fair housing ties in. Thanks.
All right, any other questions? Is there any comment from the public? Not hearing any. I'll entertain a motion for resolution 23-12.
Randy Cassidy, I'll make a motion to approve.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. I need a vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes?
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Resolution passes. Next item is resolution 23-13, approval to increase funding for an emergency home repair project at 1600 Willis Drive, lot 128.
Yeah, this is another one where we need to have a deck and a ramp. This one is extremely high on the one side where the deck portion is. I do have some photographs here. I can pass around. You guys can take a look at them. And you can see what we're dealing with. There's a couple copies here. We'll just pass those down. If you look at the first one where you see the ramp, you can see how it has deteriorated to the point where the boards don't even have enough material to hold them down. Now, we did have a contractor that went out and made some temporary repairs to this, and he actually didn't charge us a dime to do that because it was in such bad condition. And the gentleman who lives here actually has a heart condition, and the last time they took him to the hospital, the EMTs told him, with that deck and that ramp in that condition, we do not know if we're going to be able to get you out of your home fast enough to be able to get you to a care facility. So with that being said, we had a contractor that went out and out of the goodness of his heart didn't fasten down these boards that you see all sticking up, so that they could get a gurney up that ramp. We did this in two separate quotes. We did one to completely tear everything out and redo it. And then we did an option B, which is where we're going to go in and try to make repairs to this. The option A, when all the bids came back, were 2 to 2.5 times higher than option B. We can achieve the same results by doing a repair, okay? However, that repair is going to be a limited number of years, less than what a totally new repair would be. But to repair the existing ramp on the option B, we're looking at somewhere around $7,000. When we did to repair and just replace everything, we were more up around the $18,000 range. So we think we can do this fellow a just service by repairing his deck and rebuilding the ramp completely, because that's pretty much shot. We can repair the ramp because it receives better ventilation and that kind of thing. We will be doing some repairs to the decking on the ramp, the handrails around it, and the support structure that holds that deck up. So by looking at it in two different ways, where we're doing a complete tear out and rebuild, and then just a repair, we opted to go with the repair, not only for the cost, but it's something that's going to be much quicker to accomplish in the long run. So that's why we're asking, again, it's a $3,500 deal because it's a trailer. And we're asking for the increase. so we can go ahead and get that thing fixed.
Do we have the same condition with this particular landowner as we do
Yes.
with the other, where they're in agreement
That's,
that
and
this
we have
aspect?
the agreement letters in the file from the owners.
Okay.
That would allow us to go ahead and do that.
All right, any questions, any other questions on resolution 23-13? Is there any comment from the public? Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion for resolution 23-13.
Randy Cassidy, I'll make a motion to approve.
Deborah Meyerson, I'll second.
We have a first and a second. I need a vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes?
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
And Cindy Canarney, yes. Resolution passes. Next item is resolution 23-14. Approval to increase funding for an emergency home repair project at 623 West Smith Avenue.
Yeah, this is a, one that we became aware of, right around 2 weeks before Christmas, back when all that really cold weather came in. We had a request for a furnace replacement, and we went through it and we did the furnace replacement on that home. But during that time, we had that really cold weather came in, and as a result of little or no heat in the home, water pipes froze. Not only water pipes froze, the hot water heater actually froze. And some of the drain lines froze as well from the water laying in those. So as a result, with no heat, we then inherited, I guess, this problem with all the water pipes. So we need to get this water taken care of for these people and so that they can use their house. This is another one that's just been forever trying to get through. And it is quite a substantial amount of money, but at the same time, I mean, we have to get these people some water, as soon as we can.
So, at the present moment, they're not residing in this
Yes,
residence?
they are. And
With no water?
They are actually carrying water from next door to their residence to use it. They heat it on the stove for washing and bathing and that kind of thing. And, but no, they have no water. There is no actual running water in their home.
Any questions? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just have one question. It seems to me like these three different resolutions seem to be using the same person or same organization each time, because the way that the addendum looks the same. And so I'm just like, in terms of how it's structured and what the kind of like, even just things like font and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm happy to, pay extra to get these people what they need. But I'm just kind of curious, given that there's a lot of overages, if, like, how you're kind of sourcing, like, how you're getting the organizations to, like, bid on these projects or whatever, and if there's an issue in terms of, just thinking about making sure that
Yeah, the
we're
procedure
not
that we
using the
use
same people all the time that are asking for more and more.
The procedure that we use, and we put these out to the local contractors for quotes.
Yeah.
And we put them out to at least 3 guys, and based on who comes and the quotes that they give us, and comparing that to the staff quote on what, like, I figure out this project should cost. That's how we arrive at who ultimately gets the bid. Now, a lot of times, what you're seeing are projects that are identical. So you have identical contractors bidding on all these jobs, So it's not like we have this great pool of people, and really we're losing contractors because of the simple fact some of these jobs are considered too small for them. Some of them are just on an availability. Some of these guys, I mean, they're the only ones that could come out and give us a quote. And we can't just sit back and say, okay, well, we didn't get the guys that we want to quote, or we didn't get the guys that we need to quote. We only got the guys that are available.
Right, so is this just, then, I guess what I'm asking is, I don't know how much this should cost. Do you think that this is a reasonable
Yes,
a
and in a
reasonable
lot
bid.
of these cases, if you look at my, well, you don't have my staff quote there, but in a lot of these cases, they're within $500 to $1,000 of what I quote.
Okay.
So they certainly meet that 15%
Okay.
a guideline to where we try to get contractors and we try to make the work write-up so detailed that we're getting really good quotes and everybody's quoting the same thing.
Okay.
And these are actually just summary sheets that you were given, so that's why
Okay.
they're the same
Yeah.
font. So Barry just types these
I
up to
see.
I
make it
typed
clear
that
about
up
what's what.
to answer
Okay.
questions up front that you might
Okay,
have,
and you review them yourself based on what you're
I
experiencing?
write the whole thing from beginning to end.
Okay.
Larry, would it be possible with these sorts of resolutions going forward, if we could add a whereas clause that just kind of lays out, like, this is within the kind of, like, the kind of band of kind of acceptability from the perspective of what the in-house quote was? So just so that we kind of have, I think that would be helpful, especially since I understand the issue of that it's hard to get people to actually bid on these projects and actually come out. But I think having that is a kind of useful way to also kind of demonstrate to the public that we're, you know, also thinking, making sure that the costs are appropriate, that the bids are appropriate in size, given the scope of the project.
It might give what the staff quote was and say, whereas this is within
I can start
15%.
adding the
Yeah.
staff
Just,
quote in
yeah,
that as
just in
well,
the
in that summary
resolution,
sheet, if that's
we
what
don't
you
need to
want.
see all your paperwork, but
Yeah,
just
I think
something
just in
that the
terms of the
resolution
way
just
that it's
acknowledges
written.
where's the staff quote was, you know, 14.5 for this project, and thus the quote that is being accepted or proposed for the resolution is within 15% of, you know, the staff calculation, thus, you know, it complies with the city's guidelines for this program. And you know, I'm just giving but that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to add extra work to you, but I just think that that sort of stuff to just sort of indicate that we're, you know, that we're being, that,
Fiduciary responsibility.
yeah, that we're being responsible.
Yeah, and that process is done as we speak. It's just that I didn't include.
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
I didn't include that in that presentation.
Yeah,
And-
absolutely.
But rest assured, from this point forward, you will now have that.
Thank you, Barry.
All right, any other questions on resolution 23-14?
I have a question about all the resolutions, just either after or prior to this. The question I have is, where are we setting on funds in order to take care of some of these emergency repairs? Because when I hear that we've got a community member that's been heating without water from a neighbor, it concerns me, and I want to make sure we have the funds are there so we can take care of these things in the most expeditious process possible.
Yeah, so these are paid for out of community development block grant dollars. So the allocations you just approved have $100,000 in there for the upcoming program year for those rehabs. Now, we do have prior program year money that may have gone unspent or that was returned.
Mhm.
So we have some in the bank, if you will,
Okay.
that we can pull from. If we put in our annual plans to HUD that we're gonna plan to do this many rehabs and things like that, we can pull from another program year to pull project money out and put it there. So right now we're fine, but it's a great question, and one we talked about on Friday is, you know, now that Barry's come on, we are getting more rehabs moving in the pipeline, so we've got to sort of, and you all have heard my preaching about the we're really kind of kicking this in the tires and making sure that we're moving, but it's a good question, one we're on top of, and make sure we have the money for it.
Make sure we have the
That's a good
financial
question.
wherewithal to take
Yeah.
care of our community members. So.
When we pull it out of a different fund, the home program, which is the owner-occupied rehab that you all, that's funded owner-occupied rehabs before as well, is we have more money in there, but that's a much more structured, regulated program that's quite frankly tough. So,
Well, when we approve things in our CBDG or the HUD monies that went out on our social service such, and everything has a need, it's just a matter of where we have enough capital to take care of these things, take care of it. So with,
far we're okay.
with that, I'll be quiet and I'll make a motion to approve resolution 23-14. Thank you.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, I'll second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All those in favor, overall, I need a vote via roll call, please.
Deb Hutton, yes.
Deborah Meyerson, yes.
Sarah Bowerly Dansman, yes.
Randy Cassidy, yes.
Cindy Canarney, yes. Resolution passes. So this begins the next phase of our public hearing. And we are discussing home ARP allocation plan.
That's right. Thank you. So the plan for right now is to just go through the slides with you guys. I have a presentation. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to presentation mode. And quite frankly, can anyone help me with that? Because how do I start presentation mode?
Go to view.
View? Okay. Slideshow. Thank you, Sarah.
Move it to the person that has
I'm
the
used to.
lecture.
I've done it 100 times in PowerPoint. I'm not used to doing Google Docs, so thank you for that.
Okay.
I'm gonna move the other presenters, the other guests here. There we go. Okay, so the city of Bloomington, as you all have been notified, is receiving a little over $2 million. It's $2,045,237 in American Rescue Plan dollars that are being allocated through the Home Investment Partnerships Program that is managed by the Housing and Urban Development Department through the federal government. The funds have to be used by the jurisdiction. So we are the local participating jurisdiction for HUD, which means we get our money directly from HUD and CDBG and HOME and other money that's come through, especially that which came from the pandemic. So these funds, when used, have to be used to assist 4 qualifying populations as defined under federal regulation. Those who are homeless, which you would indicate, or most people would defined as traditionally homeless, so without a place to sleep on an ongoing basis, at risk of homelessness, largely related to financial insecurity or housing insecurity. Number 3, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic or dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. And number 4, other populations requiring services or housing assistance to prevent homelessness, or others who are at greatest risk of housing instability. So this is a larger category, but might include populations for people who have mental or developmental disabilities, or veterans, for instance, would fall into this group. Or someone might be struggling with substance abuse. So the slides, which are not advancing, I'm gonna just knock it out here. Not sure why they're not going forward here, but give me just a minute. Sorry about that. I'm gonna exit. Okay. Well, everybody, this is not. Went ahead. There we go. Okay. Let me. Okay, great. So the uses of the funds, these are prescribed. So there's an allocation plan template that we can use money in a number of different areas. Supportive services, which is a very large umbrella category. Nonprofit operation and capacity building. Rental housing development. Acquisition or development of non-congregate shelter. And that is a term. Non-congregate is a sort of non-traditional shelter. So congregate shelter is what you would consider traditional shelter. Non-congregate is where you'd have separate sleeping areas, separate bathrooms, that kind of thing. And because this stems from the pandemic, that's where that comes from, to lower the risk of spread of COVID, make sure people are not congregating when they're sleeping and things like that. Tenant-based rental assistance is an existing program through the HOME program that we have other funds for.
Is that basically a housing voucher?
Yes, in all intents and purposes.
Okay.
So those are the uses. Our outreach, so the prescription from HUD is we are required to do a certain amount of outreach to certain agencies over a certain period of time. Thus far, since November, we've done 32 meetings or conversations with service providers, housing agencies, community groups, and elected officials here in the area. We have been to 3 public meetings to invite public comments, so those have been via the city council. I'll be going back there. The third one, I'll be going back next week to give an update on where we are and just invite public comment that way. We have 2 public hearings, which we're doing, one tonight, one on the 20th at our next meeting, and then we'll go up for a 2-week public comment period the first week of March for 15 days, and the plan has to be to HUD by the end of March, which I'll get to. So where are we with all this input we've sought and feedback we've gotten? I think we are headed toward standing up a focused supportive services program. And what I'm hearing a lot about is case management. So for those in any of the 4 qualifying populations, whatever you do, the activity has to be eligible for those populations. So how clients are served will be part of this plan, and how we state our referrals. And there's the system called the coordinated entry system, which you may be familiar with. But one gap is assessment services. So assessing people to get into the coordinated entry system has been pointed out as a gap. Once they're in the system, how are they helped that way with ongoing case management and navigation toward housing and other services? Once they're housed, how do you keep them housed? And what are those ongoing services? What do they look like? There's also a component for street outreach. So, for instance, one of our organizations, HealthNet, has ongoing street outreach, and they provide medical service. So they have a nurse practitioner that goes out and helps treat those who are on the street. And then also they have some mental health service provision in there as well. They could use more capacity there. So that direct supportive service angle is where we think we are going with this based on that. There are some rental housing projects which are coming online. That is one of the categories as well. The core building, which we mentioned to you tonight, has 10 units of supportive housing. The retreat at Switchyard, which is what we broke ground on last summer, has 10 units in partnership with Stonebelt. Those are 2 projects, for example, where funds might be able to go, because those are the units that would help one of the 4 qualifying populations. They couldn't be applied to the entire project, but to help support those units could be a possibility there. And then with all of this, we want to support the efforts of the Heading Home of South Central Indiana initiative. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We've got a $5 million effort going in our community, which I think makes us unique. We want to dovetail with that and not sort of step outside of that and reinvent a wheel. So how can we complement that moving forward? So here's our draft budget. The asterisks that you see, the nonprofit operating, capacity building, and administration are all capped statutorily, so we can't do any more than that. So I've maxed those amounts out just for purposes of drafting the budget. I've got $750,000 perhaps for rental housing. Those projects are in various stages. There's also a third one that may come online that is not yet, it doesn't have a location, and we're still working on that. So these are tentative, but important that you know what those are. I don't have anything for tenant-based rental assistance or acquisition or development of non-congregate shelter, because the need seems to be in those supportive services. And again, that is a huge area. I think we need to target it toward case management, street outreach. What are those direct services? You can do everything from moving expenses to food service provision. And I want to be careful about how I say this, because I don't want to dismiss any feedback we've gotten, but I've sort of if I try to synthesize all of it, the idea also is that we need to be focused in this. This is $2 million. We have until 2030 to spend it. So if you spread out $2 million, or as it were, $783,000, for instance, over 6 years, that's not going to go very far. So it's really important to maybe focus it and target it over a couple of years or 3 years in grant programs. So that's where this looks like we're headed. So during the month of February, I'll be continuing to draft the plan. I'll come back to you in a couple of weeks to get any additional public comment that folks may have. And then we'll do that public comment in early March, and then send it to HUD. My goal is to have it to HUD by the 3rd week in March. It's due March 31st, but we don't want the HUD system to explode, because everybody's going to be submitting them that week. So we're going to try to get it in a little earlier than that. So if people have public comment outside of tonight's meeting, they can email me at hand@bloomington.in.gov. By March 15th is when I'm requesting public comment. That'll be the last day that it's up. That'll be right in the middle of the public comment period that we'll have it, where it'll be posted at the library and online and here at City Hall. So that concludes the presentation. Happy to hear any questions, comments from anyone in the room or in the public. And I'll be taking notes. So.
Are hard costs eligible? I'm just thinking of the 2 programs we just heard about, the hand. I mean, like, can hand submit for funds to support, so there's not the backlog maybe, or to help ease stuff of the 2 different programs, the emergency home repair and the housing modifications for accessible living?
We probably could. That's a great question. We probably could if we could determine that that homeowner or that resident is at risk of homelessness, but for the rehab.
Stability was number 4 on that list, right?
Which list do you mean?
The first list on the first slide.
under
Number 4
the
is
fourth.
other populations requiring services or housing assistance to prevent homelessness, others at greatest risk of housing instability. And
Right.
if you don't have water,
Sure.
if you don't have
Yeah.
heat, if you don't have a ramp that the emergency folks can't guarantee they can get you out of your house safely, that seems like all those folks qualify,
Yeah.
right?
That's a great question, Commissioner. Hard costs for rehabs. I don't know. I'll check into that. I might offer that the expense there could be pretty big per homeowner. So if we were doing $10,000-$15,000 for one home, that's one family versus any case management that might serve more than that. So I think we'd have to figure out the outcomes there, and that's important. So that's a good question. I will get the answer to that.
When you're looking at this from supportive services and what we're looking at to try to keep people housed, get their mental condition where they need to be and be able to afford, help provide them with the life skills they need. The amount of money we're talking here is not going to go very far.
No, it will
in
not.
any capacity. So when we look at that, what's the best place? It's a hard question. And it's very difficult to say this because we're not mental health providers.
Right.
And a lot of the issues that we're looking at in our community at the present moment seem to be centered around that, which in turn has to do with the homelessness, has to do with some of our security issues that we have.
Yeah.
So as we're looking at $2 million, how do we put it towards that? Because, as you said, the hard costs for the people that are here, we know what those are. This other aspect in regards to this, it's almost impossible to identify.
Yeah.
So
You're wondering specifically about mental health service provision?
I'm just trying to look at it from an aspect of how we look this, whether it be in the VIM situation or, the medical conditions where people are going, what we try to do with it to make the impact that creates the best security and safety for everybody in our community, including those that don't have the issues.
Some of the feedback I got, it's a good question. And that one may elude us a little bit for this because the expense, what it takes to stand up, to sort of move the needle on mental health service provision, you're looking at getting more providers, which if an agency hires a provider to be on site for their organization, they're serving their clients, not necessarily anyone else's. That's a pretty big expense. Number two, what do you do when this grant money runs out, and what's the sustainability plan for that ongoing staff support? I did meet with Centerstone, who's the largest mental health provider in the area. Yeah, that's a good point. And they talked about the need for case management too. So they're down because they've got permanent supportive housing at places like Kinzer Flats, and they are not able to they're not able to maximize the capacity on case management that they need. So it's that ongoing case management. There is that medical professional side of things who can prescribe medication, that sort of thing, and that one is tougher because again, you've got people that's both limited capacity and limited funds, what it takes to hire and keep a person on who has the training and the credentials to be a nurse practitioner or whatever. So Health Net does do some of that on out and about. They have a nurse practitioner who provides psychiatric services, but that one's a tougher one for sure. Mental health.
As we put these monies together, it's $2 million here, it's $5 million for heading homeless. How do we aggregate some of these funds in order to get the maximum amount to help our community members? Because as we continue to say, well, I don't have enough to do this, then we have problems that occur in those areas.
Yep.
And we want to be able to contain safety, security, and the ability for everybody to be able to support themselves at some point, even as we all have had troubled times. So when $2 million sounds like a lot of money until you start trying to serve a community that needs help.
Well, one thing I've not been given what I consider positive direction on is, should we sort of wait, right? Should we say, okay, we've got all this going on, and should we say, okay, in 2025 we're going to do this $2 million grant?
That's really going to be worth in 2025.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Well, that's a good point. Also, if we put all the money together now, what happens in 2025 or 2026? So it's kind of varying philosophies. I've been encouraged by HUD to sort of get it out the door as soon as possible. That way, I think maybe to your point, but also there could be guidelines or I guess guidance further down the road that a certain amount has to be spent by a certain period of time, which we don't know yet. That's what they're doing with some other pandemic money. So I've been encouraged that we need to probably get it out the door as soon as we're able rather than wait until some of that other program money is spent down, which originally was a thought I had to try to spread some of this out a little bit and make it more sustainable, but you know,
Whatever you can make the impact.
time value of money.
Yeah, there's time value of money, and what the other question I have, just as the redevelop, or being one member in the redevelopment, as we're looking here, we're spending tens of millions of dollars to redevelop a neighborhood, and we're also looking at our supportive services being right in the middle of that, which, if it's integrated properly, can work well, but we need to look at the whole area as a whole when we do that. How do we do that? Because we're allocating, we want affordability, we want services, and we want to be able to integrate, as you said, the all walks of life into the Hopewell project. When I hear Centerstone is one of our participants in regards to that melds all the way to how do we do that and not cause ourselves an issue.
Yep. Yeah.
So this is not my area of expertise. So one of the things that I was surprised about was the idea of focusing so much on the kind of community support and not on not putting any money into rental assistance. And so I'd really love to understand more, is that I'd love to understand more about that. And then the other thing is that in this conversation, it sounds like we are kind of operating under the assumption that most homeless, most unhoused people in our community, that the kind of primary factor for that explains that is mental health or substance use disorder. And I'm wondering if we have a community survey that can validate that that is actually accurate, because my understanding is that at least nationwide, when we're talking about chronic unhoused population, that it is more likely that mental health issues and substance use issues are a big part of that. But there's a lot of homelessness is kind of transitory and also and related to things like people not having a job because they lost their job, right? Or other things that are, or their car broke down and now they got fired from their job and now they've been evicted. And once you get evicted, it's very hard to get back into a rental situation. And so I'm just kind of curious if by it seems like you're putting all your eggs in the basket of this is a mental health problem, and I'm just wondering if that is really a reflection of where we are as a community.
Well, I don't want to indicate that I'm putting all the eggs in the mental health basket. That's not what we're planning to do. That's,
okay, because it sounds like it, because you're saying that you're focused on these, these services, that these social services that sound kind of geared around issues of mental health and substance use.
Well, that's a component of it, certainly, but not all. So someone could not be experiencing a mental health crisis or have a diagnosed illness and still be unhoused and still need the case management. So when that, as I understand it, and I'm still a bit of a novice at this too, so there is what's called the point in time count, which is sort of which you probably have heard of. It was done last week. Right, last week.
I have heard of that.
So that will be, that's sort of a universe of folks to start with. How many people are considered homeless under the point in time count? How many beds do we have? What supportive services are out there? The aim of this money is to look at, for instance, that universe of folks and say, what's out there to help them? Do we have enough beds? Do we have enough case management? Do we have enough mental health service provision? Do we have enough food? Do we have enough everything, right? So that's sort of the answer to your first question. With rental assistance, it is a tough one, and supportive services can include rental assistance. Tenant-based rental assistance is a separate program that we are trying to revamp a little bit, so I didn't put money into that specifically. I don't know, though honestly I want to be upfront, that rental assistance is the best place for this money, and I'll explain why. We still have some COVID money through CDBG that has not been spent down by one of our organizations for rental assistance to specifically help people who are unhoused or would be unhoused. So we gave one organization about $100,000. They've got about $75,000 left to disperse in rental assistance. township trustees can help with some housing expenses. The state had a big rental assistance program that I've heard discussion could come back, but I don't know that, and that's all I'm gonna say about it, because I don't know one way or the other. This could help with that, but the administration of rental assistance is quite a bit. We'd have to find someone to administer that rental assistance program, and getting the documentation and the money out and all of that it's an administrative task for sure. So are there other ways we can help? I'll also say about rental assistance and sort of housing security is that the American Rescue Plan, that the money that the city got is helping fund the Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund at the Housing Authority, and then the county, through Heading Home, is funding people outside of the city. So we've got sort of money tackling the housing security issue in other ways. It's not, there's no silver bullet with any of this. I don't want anybody to think I've got, these are all the answers, but there are different efforts, money targeted at different efforts that could help.
That's
So
super helpful, and from the perspective
Yeah.
of like doing public hearings, it may be helpful to have as like a first slide,
Mm-hmm.
kind of even sort of how this fits into other buckets of money and other programs
Mm-hmm.
that the city has available, because that I think helps to also address like several questions about, well, why this rather than that, but
Yeah.
also kind of addresses Randy's point of how do we kind of combine different pots together to work effectively. And then the only other thing that I'll say is that since you said that you haven't heard a lot about like, do we kind of hold back on the money or spend it, I'm from the perspective of we should spend it, because there are people in our community that need it now, and if it's much better to design a program that we think is like fully funded, or as fully funded as it can be, to actually make a difference, because it will be easier to get additional funding if we can show that this is working. And so I would just go ahead and like spend, like don't like waste it, but like spend what you think you need to spend to solve the problem, and then figure out kind of where to get the money for additional years after you.
well, that's quite frankly, a big concern, is that just because I've been sort of on the grantor side of $2.7 million for Heading Home, and $2 million more, and it's all right now, and then what happens when that money's gone? What do we do for the rest of the decade? Well, maybe, but this is all also pandemic related, so is there a way to stretch that pandemic money out a little bit? And I fear, and I talked to a good percentage of the people I met with, they were responding about case management. We need more case management capacity. I was like, well, what happens when this is done? And sort of the nature of anybody that's worked in a nonprofit is, you're always, it's all about survival, right? You're like, well, we'll figure it out, right? But if we can help alleviate some of that stress about hiring case management and then figuring out what to do in 2 or 3 years it was something I brought up, but this is good feedback. So thank you.
What's the ability to make the program started, make an impact, and make it where it's self-sustainable?
Yeah.
Is what we're looking for.
And I don't know that there's an answer to that, because this is money that we won't,
Ever see
theoretically
again.
won't see again. So.
Well, in light of that, and I want to say I strongly agree with the spend it now
Mhm.
mode, but I'd love to see more of an emphasis on direct assistance. I know you talked a little bit about, tenant-based rental assistance. I'm talking about things that actually programs don't often pay for. I saw a couple of security deposits paid in the claims register, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But that money is hard to come by,
Yeah.
right? So utility deposits, rental deposits, even, and again, I'm just talking big picture, I don't know if this money would pay for like even safety net money, like the car repair that gets done so that you can get to work and you don't lose your apartment, right? So just looking at opportunities for direct assistance or home repair or accessible modifications, the things that will directly help specific people with housing stability, again, because this is not, relatively speaking, a huge amount of money, and if you can get it in the hands of people that need it right now, that's, in my opinion, going to do a lot more than just, I'm not discounting at all the importance of case management or other, what I'll call indirect services, but I think the people who really need the money, this is a great opportunity for that. And I think a lot of them would qualify at least under those eligibility categories. Again, there may be other constraints that we're not talking about right now, but to the extent possible, direct supports.
Okay.
I think that was part of what I was trying to get at by the idea of like how much of this is like people who have like mental health issues that need to see services versus that like there are just kind of a string of bad luck that gets you from being in a home and like to not in a home. And I think that there's a lot more of that than people realize, because when people think of unhoused people, they think about the people that they see on the streets, and there's a
Not
lot
the housing
of
insecure folks who,
yeah,
you know.
there a lot more of there's a lot more of this is stuff that's a lot harder for the
Right, and the
community
pit
to
count's
see.
not a cat and a cat to those people, right? The
Yeah,
pit
exactly.
count's for people who meet a very specific definition of homelessness. And, you know, there's lots of folks that we would consider homeless that don't qualify for that either. And then there's the folks who are housing insecure, you know, that had to just put all their available cash into a deposit, et cetera. And, just need to.
Those that are trying, that aren't asking, that aren't part of the statistic. They're just
Exactly. I
working
mean, you
every
know,
day
we
to
could do
try
a
to-
universal basic income with this. I'd be all for it, just saying. You know, that's probably a little above and beyond. But I'm just saying, in terms of the way to support the needs to people who need it now, before it's an emergency, right? And before we need to, you know, double the amount of the home repair fund because it waited so long, right? If we can get it sooner in the process, maybe we'd meet that 3,500 because it was caught, you know, 2 years earlier as opposed to, you know, deferred.
Sure. No, that's helpful. I know, you know, what's something that's sticking out for some reason is storage, you know, moving and storage expenses are eligible, but I need to check on your repair question and, you know, car repair questions, things like that. I don't know. So the supportive services, it's a pretty large set of guidance, so I need to dig into it.
Requires a ton of kind of help. Like there are even things like, I mean, assistance for helping. Like so, for instance, you could do like another thing I think of is not having childcare, right? And not having childcare, and then like because your kid is sick, and then you have to miss work, and if that happens too much, you get fired, and then all of a sudden you get evicted, right? But so. You know, I think that there are things that kind of could be thought of that don't really meet the kind of that seem to not be kind of discussed oftentimes. That would be really helpful.
One of the things that has to be, to your point, because we had a discussion with the local child care provider, who many of us know, you have to tie the data. So we had this very specific conversation. But for the provision of that service, would someone be at risk of homelessness? And we talked very specifically about the data that could be provided to show that, because that's what we're going to have to do. You've got to make the argument in the data case that because it's not, I guess that's direct service provision, but you've got to make the case with data and how the outcome would change. So that's where we have to go with stuff like that with child care provision, for instance. So it's we got to just make that. Yeah, we just got to connect those dots.
Yeah, the data may not be there. You may not be able to get the data, but it's real.
Well, right, because we have to say it's going to serve population 1, 2, 3, 4, or any combination thereof. That's who you have to. This money has to be helping those people in those populations. So, is this family in category 4? Because without childcare, parents wouldn't be able to go to work. That's what you have to do.
That's not a risk of homelessness necessarily. It's greatest risk of housing instability, right? So just to kind of not make it too much about either you're going to be kicked out on the street if you don't do this, but just, you know, you're maybe on that next step towards housing instability that we'd rather get you before you're about to be kicked out.
And working in an hourly wage job without, you know, without very much paid time off or any paid time off, and you know that's where it creates a real problem. Kid gets sick, and all of a sudden you're kicked out of your home.
I had a conversation this morning with someone talking about their 3rd grader going to get their kindergartner to walk them across to where they lived in their apartment because mom had to work.
Yeah,
And it's
all
real.
All over the city. I mean, all over communities around the country. That's the fact of life. So.
The reality. All right. Is there any public comment regarding home ARP allocation plan? All right, this ends the public hearing portion of our meeting. And moving on to the next item of business, any general or business discussion that we haven't already covered? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Good night, everyone.